I thought buying a lake cabin meant peace. You know, sunsets, coffee on the porch, maybe a neighbor waving once in a while. Turns out what I really bought was a front row seat to a slow-motion coup by the HOA. Yeah, a committee with clipboards. One of them literally sold my house out from under me, and not just in theory. I mean full-on new owners measuring the steps kind of sold. And I didn't even list it. If this sounds impossible, just wait. You're not going to believe how deep it goes. Ever had peace, then watched it get priced and posted online? Tell me what you would have done. 2 years ago, if someone had told me I'd go to war with a neighborhood committee president, I would have laughed and poured another cup of coffee. Back then, the word HOA sounded like something that happened to other people, not the kind of thing that wrecks lives. I was too busy trying to put myself back together after a divorce that hit harder than I cared to admit. My ex-wife Danielle had this way of turning her words into weapons. "You're a great guy, Alex," she told me the day she left her bags already packed. "You just never fight for anything. You're like a paper towel in a hurricane." She'd said it right in front of our couple's therapist. I remember the silence that followed. Dr. Peters cleared his throat, but I was frozen. Danielle stood up, and I didn't stop her. I just watched her go. I still hear her voice sometimes when I hesitate. "You just let people walk all over you." The truth is, she wasn't wrong. I'd spent most of my adult life avoiding confrontation. Even when my old landlord tried to increase my rent without notice, I just nodded and said, "Okay," like a coward. I wanted peace more than I wanted fairness. But peace can become a prison when you're too scared to push back. That's how I ended up at the lake cabin, a small weather-worn place with peeling white trim and a crooked welcome mat. But inside, it was mine. The recliner by the window still had the indent from the first night I cried myself to sleep, watching reruns of Frasier. The chipped coffee mug with "World's Okayest Man" on it had survived the divorce. Danielle had thrown it in the box like it was a joke. And the bookshelf. Every title I'd promised myself I'd read someday now lined up in solemn formation. No one judged me here. No one expected anything from me. The cabin smelled like pine and old paper. There was a faded photo of me and my dad fishing hanging next to the door, his arm around my shoulder, my smile way too wide. I'd put it up the first night as a reminder that I wasn't always this broken. Even the creaky kitchen table had meaning. It was where I'd signed my divorce papers, where I'd made my first fresh start grocery list, where I'd written down personal goals like take walks and stop avoiding eye contact with the neighbors. The lake view helped. Every morning the sunrise felt like a silent promise you get to try again. And for a while it worked. The neighbors were warm in a non-intrusive way. Bill, a 70-something widower next door, waved every morning while walking his ancient golden retriever. Mrs. Park always offered me extra cookies after her bake sales, even though I was usually just a drive-by hi. One Saturday we had a casual barbecue near the dock, burgers, corn on the cob, light beer, and gossip. Someone joked about the old HOA president being allergic to fence paint. At least she wasn't nuts about mailboxes, Bill said, earning a few chuckles. That was the first time I heard how particular HOA rules could get. I didn't think much of it. Then Sharon Mitchell arrived. She moved into the sleek gray house at the end of the block and won the HOA vote the next month by default. Nobody else ran. I remember opening the door one morning, still half asleep, and there she was, business blazer heels, bright yellow, measuring tape stretched across my lawn. I blinked, confused. Can I help you?" I asked, scratching my head. "Your grass is 2 inches above regulation," she said without looking up. Was this woman serious, or was I on some kind of hidden camera show? Her tone was calm, but her hands trembled like someone holding back a scream. I laughed genuinely, thinking it was a joke. "Ma'am, this is a lawn, not a golf course." She stared at me. "Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson," she said, clicking her pen. I remember thinking, she looks more like a court clerk than a neighbor. When she walked off, I didn't know whether to be annoyed or concerned. That evening, I saw her again standing alone under a street lamp across the street, measuring someone's crooked mailbox with that same damn tape. It was late, no clipboard, no audience, just her in silence writing something down. It didn't feel like enforcement, it felt compulsive, maybe even sad. Over the next few weeks, Sharon became a fixture. Her power grew by the hour. A camera appeared on her porch, then 2. Then a laminated list of rules taped to the HOA bulletin board. People chuckled nervously but didn't push back. One morning I tried speaking up, joking to the group chat that next she'll measure our air. No one replied, not even Bill. That silence felt colder than the lake in February. I started keeping my yard neater than ever. I bought the right kind of mulch. I repainted my porch railing twice. Somewhere in me, that old fear of confrontation had woken up again. Still, I tried to hold on to the peace. I told myself, just follow the rules. Don't rock the boat, it'll blow over. But one night, I sat alone on my porch with a beer in hand, watching Sharon pace between houses with her flashlight. She stopped at the Parks place, made a note, then stood there for a long moment just staring at their door. She didn't knock, she just watched. The whole thing gave me chills. That was when I first said it aloud under my breath, like testing the shape of a thought I didn't want. This isn't normal. Lying in bed that night, I kept thinking about Danielle again. Her words from our final fight echoing like static, "You'll never stand up to anyone. That's why I can't stay." I wanted to shout back, tell her she was wrong, but I hadn't. And now there was a stranger in my neighborhood holding a clipboard, rewriting the rules of my life. Was it just Sharon being strict, or was this the start of something much darker? I had no idea how right I was to be afraid. Because what came next would turn this quiet little cabin into a battleground, and me into the man my ex-wife never thought I could be. That night, I sat on my porch a little longer than usual. The lake was still, like it was holding its breath. I kept thinking about the way Sharon had looked at me. Not angry, not rude, just hollow, like someone who wasn't quite sure if she was real unless she was enforcing something. I don't know why that stuck with me, but it did. Maybe because I'd felt the same once, lost in routine, not standing up for anything, just following rules because it was easier than questioning them. But this was different. This was my home, and something deep down told me Sharon wasn't done yet. It was a Tuesday morning around 8 o'clock when everything I thought I knew came unglued. The coffee in my hand was still steaming, the morning chill nipping at my toes through thin socks as I stepped onto the porch in my bathrobe. Birds were chirping, the lake was glassy and still, and I remember thinking how peaceful it all was. Then I heard it. Bill's voice, sharp and urgent. "Alex, you need to come out here now." The tone sliced through the calm like a blade. My stomach clenched. I dropped the mug, hot liquid splashing across the wooden boards, and ran toward him, heart thudding like a drumline. That's when I saw it. A bright red sign staked into the grass right in front of my cabin, angled slightly so it faced the road like a billboard of betrayal. "For sale, urgent, $180,000. I stared at it, blinking, as if maybe it would rearrange itself into something else if I looked hard enough. The plastic creaked in the breeze. My hands felt cold, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I glanced at Bill. He didn't say a word, just looked at me like he was watching a man find out he was dying. Then I saw them. A middle-aged couple strolling around the property, pointing at my porch like it was part of a museum exhibit. The woman was measuring the front step with a tape. The man was taking pictures on his phone. "That has to go," he said. "We'll replace it with a wraparound deck." I took a step forward. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Can I ask what exactly you were doing on my property?" They turned with sunny smiles like I was the welcome committee. "Oh, you must be Mr. Thompson," the woman said. "We're the Johnsons. Just paid the deposit with the HOA this morning." I felt my jaw loosen, but no words came out. "Deposit," I finally managed. This isn't for sale." The man chuckled like I'd told a good joke. "The HOA president told us you'd agreed to sell, said you were relocating to Florida for health reasons." He opened his phone and tapped something. "We even saw the contract. Pretty airtight stuff." They walked past me like I was a lawn ornament. The woman peeked inside through the kitchen window, then opened the front door. "Hope you don't mind. We just wanted to get a feel for the space." I stood frozen. She had her phone out, taking pictures of my bookshelf. "Hey, you can't just go in there," I called out, stepping after them. The man raised a hand. "Relax, it's covered under Section 14B of the HOA agreement. Transitional Occupancy Access Clause. Very standard, transitional. What, I never agreed to any of this?" I snapped. "I'm not moving anywhere." The woman barely looked up. "We'll obviously give you time to vacate. The HOA said 30 days, right?" My fists clenched. I wanted to scream. Instead, I grabbed my phone and called the one person who might have answers, Sharon. She picked up immediately. "Alex," she said too calmly. "I figured you'd call." My voice shook. "Why are there people walking through my house saying they bought it?" She sighed. "Alex, you violated too many regulations." The board took action. "You can't sell my house," I yelled. "It's mine." There was a pause. Not anymore. Click. Just like that. I stared at the phone like it might explain what just happened. My legs buckled, and I sank onto the porch step. It felt like the divorce all over again when Danielle said she was done, when she took half of everything and walked out like I was just a page to turn. I walked inside the Johnsons, finally gone, but their fingerprints were still everywhere. The air smelled different, invaded. I touched the edge of my recliner, the one where I'd spent so many nights watching bad TV trying to feel okay. I looked at the photo of my dad and me. I remembered when I hung it, hands shaking but determined. That memory felt like it belonged to someone else now. I passed the kitchen table where I'd made my first meal alone, toast and canned soup. Nothing special, but it was mine. Now, it felt like all of it might vanish overnight. Outside, neighbors had started gathering. I saw Mrs. Park with her 2 kids standing behind her car like it was a shield. She looked at me with pity and fear. A couple down the street walked their dog a little faster when they passed my cabin. One woman I didn't even know pulled out her phone and started filming me from her porch. I felt like a zoo exhibit, or worse, like a cautionary tale. "Don't mess with Sharon," they'd whisper. "Look what happened to him." My ears burned. My fists were trembling again, but not with fear, with something that almost felt like anger. That night, I sat in the dark with no lights on. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the cabin. I didn't eat. I didn't move. I just stared at the walls and thought about all the mornings I'd felt safe here. And now, it was like I was living in someone else's house, waiting for the real owner to come home and kick me out. Danielle's voice came back cruel and crystal clear. "You never fight for anything." I'd believed her. I'd worn that label like it was tattooed on my chest. But now I wasn't sure I could live with that anymore. I looked out the window at the red sign glowing under the porch light. My home, my life had been turned into a transaction. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say, that I'd been HOA'd out of existence? They'd laugh. Or worse, tell me it was civil, legal, above board. No, if I wanted to keep what was mine, I'd have to do something else, something bold, something unlike me. That night, I stopped being the guy who let things happen. That night, I started thinking like someone who could make things happen. Rodriguez didn't even meet me at the door. I found him sitting in the kitchen, staring at an unplugged microwave, like he forgot what it was for. On the table was a crayon drawing. His daughter had sketched their old blue house, complete with the porch swing Sharon had ordered removed. I didn't say anything. What could I say to a man who'd watched his home disappear one fine notice at a time? Mrs. Johnson offered me tea in a chipped mug with a flower painted on it, daisies. I almost laughed. Not marigolds. Daisies. "I kept one bulb," she said, holding up a little planter like it was a memory in dirt. I didn't know if I was supposed to smile or cry. The next morning I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My legs ached, my head pounded, and my stomach curled every time I looked out the window at the red for sale sign still impaled in my lawn. But I knew I couldn't just sit there waiting for someone else to fix this. If Sharon had the power to erase my life with a few signatures, what was stopping her from doing it to someone else? I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my notebook, and decided to start knocking on doors, asking questions, even if no one wanted to answer. The first few houses didn't go well. One neighbor opened the door just a crack and muttered, "I'm sorry, Alex. I can't get involved," before shutting it in my face. Another one, a guy I used to share barbecue ribs with at neighborhood potlucks, just shook his head and said, "Don't bring this to my door, man. I've got kids." That one stung. The silence after that rejection felt louder than any insult. It wasn't just fear, it was survival. Sharon had turned our neighborhood into a quiet dictatorship, and no one wanted to be the next casualty. I almost turned around, but then I knocked on Bill's door. Bill let me in without a word, just gestured toward the worn recliner across from his. We sat in silence for a while until he finally said, "You know, I tried once." I looked up. "Tried what?" He rubbed his temples. "Tried fighting back. About a year ago. She fined me $500 for not repainting my mailbox in seasonal compliance." I appealed. Wrote letters. Thought I was being brave. He let out a short, bitter laugh. Next month, I had $1,000 in landscaping violations. 2 months later, code enforcement knocked on my door. He looked at me. I almost sold my house just to breathe again. He gave me Rodriguez's new address, said the guy might be willing to talk. I drove across town to a dingy apartment complex that smelled like mold and microwaved leftovers. Rodriguez opened the door cautiously, his shoulders tense but his eyes softened when I said my name. Inside, the place was cramped boxes stacked like barriers, the couch sunken in the middle. But on the wall were framed photos of a little girl with big curls and an even bigger smile. "That's Isabella," he said, pride briefly breaking through the exhaustion in his voice. "She's 6 now, took her first steps on our old porch." He handed me a small photo, his hands trembling slightly. "That Christmas we stayed up late putting together a dollhouse she never stopped talking about. The porch lights were tangled, and I burned the turkey, but it was perfect." His smile faded. Then Sharon came with her violations. Said my door was the wrong shade of blue. $50 a week. I tried to repaint, but every time I fixed one thing, she found another. She knew I couldn't keep up. He looked at the photo again. Now she asks why Santa doesn't come to apartments. My throat tightened. I couldn't speak. Mrs. Johnson lived on the second floor of a nursing apartment. The hallway smelled like bleach and canned soup. When she opened the door, her face lit up briefly. "Oh, Alex, you look tired." Her apartment was the size of a motel room, fluorescent lights buzzing above beige curtains drawn tight. Cardboard boxes lined every wall labeled Book's Kitchen Guest Room. She gestured to a single rocking chair near the window. "That's the only thing I brought from my house. My late husband built it for me, said it was just the right creak for thinking." She ran her hand along the armrest like it was sacred. She pulled out a dusty photo album, flipping through carefully. "I planted daisies because my granddaughter loved them. Apparently marigolds were the regulation flower. I got a warning first, then fines. I tried calling the board. No one answered. Next thing I knew, I had 30 days to vacate or face legal action." Her voice quivered. "I'm 75, Alex. I don't understand this new way of punishing people." She clutched the album tightly, her hands trembling. "I saved this in the chair. Everything else, it's in one of those boxes or gone." I couldn't look at her without feeling like I'd failed her somehow. I left feeling hollow. Outside, I sat in my car and stared at the wheel. A part of me wanted to quit. Maybe just let the Johnsons take the cabin. Let Sharon win. What was I even trying to do, be the neighborhood hero that was never me? I was the guy who signed the divorce papers in silence. The guy who let a landlord triple his rent without blinking. But as I put the keys in the ignition, I saw Mrs. Park's name flash on my phone. I answered. "Alex," she whispered, voice shaking. "I'm scared. She sent me a notice this morning. Said my trash bins were out of alignment." There was a long pause. Then she added, "I can't afford to move again. My kids don't know what's happening, and I don't want them to. Please, please don't stop." I looked out the windshield, imagining my cabin, hollow and empty. Then I pictured Rodriguez's daughter asking about Santa. I saw Mrs. Johnson holding that rocking chair, like it was a lifeline. And I saw myself 10 years older, broken, moving into some tiny apartment with a view of a parking lot and no lake, wondering if I could have done something, but chose not to. That night, I sat on my porch watching the water. My reflection stared back like a version of me I didn't recognize. I imagined cardboard boxes stacked in my kitchen. I imagined pawning off my recliner, shredding old letters, storing away that photo of my dad like it didn't mean anything anymore. The thought made me nauseous. I stood up, clenched my fists, and whispered into the night, "Not me, not this time." I didn't know what the next move was, but I knew I had to make one. Because Sharon wasn't just stealing homes, she was stealing people's peace. And I couldn't let her steal mine. When I got back to the cabin that evening, I didn't turn the lights on. I just sat in the dark, listening to the creaks of the old wood and the wind off the lake. It used to make me feel peaceful. Now it felt like something was closing in. I had names now, real people who had lost everything because they planted daisies or forgot to tilt their mailbox back upright. And the worst part, nobody had fought back. They all just accepted it. Well, maybe that used to be me too, but not anymore. Something had shifted, and I knew what I had to do. The night after visiting Rodriguez and Mrs. Johnson, I sat at the edge of my bed, the photo album resting open across my side. My thumb brushed across a picture of me in a cheap office suit, arms stiff at my sides. It was from my old job back when I thought showing up early and staying late earned you respect. I remembered standing outside HR's glass door after my manager took credit for a project I'd led for 3 months. "You'll take this quietly, Alex," he had said, not as a suggestion, but a verdict. And I had. No letter, no complaint. I just nodded and kept my head down. I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling fan spinning uselessly. Never again, I whispered. Back then I had let myself believe that silence was strength, that letting things go was noble. But Sharon wasn't just taking credit for a spreadsheet, she was erasing people's lives. I stood up and walked to the window. Across the lake, Sharon's house glowed with warm light. Through binoculars, I watched her move from room to room, phone pressed to her ear, pacing with mechanical grace. I muttered under my breath, "Enjoy the control while it lasts." The next afternoon, Mrs. Park waved me over as I walked past with a stack of foam board signs under my arm. "Alex," she said softly, "I know you mean well, but what if she fights back harder?" Her eyes darted around nervously, like even the trees might snitch. "What if this makes it worse for all of us?" I looked at her, heart thudding, then said, "Because if I don't do this, she'll never stop. Today it's me, tomorrow it's your kids." Sharon feeds off fear. This isn't just about a house, it's about telling her we see her now. She didn't answer, but she didn't stop me either. That night, I launched Phase 1, creating the face of a fake future. I played with names Lakeside Renewal, Lakeside Reshape, the New Lakeside Collective. All sounded like failed cults. Finally, I settled on Lakeside Modernization Initiative. I tested fonts, color palettes, and even logos. My favorite was a clean white LMI over a silhouette of pine trees. I wrote the slogan while brushing my teeth, "Tomorrow's Lakeside Today." It was the kind of corny nonsense Sharon might actually believe. I typed up a fake team bio led by visionary real estate innovators committed to elevating lakeside living and chuckled darkly at my own villainy. To sell it harder, I dialed my voicemail and left a message in my best sales voice. "Hi, yes, just calling again to follow up on that parcel lot near Dockview Lane. We're very interested in closing before the fiscal quarter if rezoning clears. Let us know LMI is ready to move fast." I played it back twice. It sounded believable. I hated how easy it was. Then again, maybe I'd just been too afraid to try cleverness before. Maybe Danielle had been right when she said, "You always play by the book, Alex. That's why people keep writing you out of their stories." The next night, Bill and I cleared off my kitchen table and rolled out an old paper map of the neighborhood. "Push pins?" he asked. "Absolutely," I grinned. We marked key intersections, mailbox clusters, and any place Sharon passed during her daily walks. Rodriguez arrived around 10 bringing beers and duct tape. "You sure you weren't military?" Bill asked while taping a sign behind the park bench. "Only in spirit," I smirked. "We're not just placing signs," I added. "We're planting confusion." Rodriguez grinned. "I like it. It's chess, not war. Though if it turns into war, I still have my hammer." At one point I froze mid-placement, a sudden knot tightening in my chest. "What if we actually scare people too much?" I asked. "What if families panic? Move out? This isn't just a prank, it could ruin someone's peace." Rodriguez put down the hammer and looked me straight in the eyes. "Sharon already did that. You're just showing them the fire they've been pretending not to see." His voice was steady. "Fear doesn't begin with you, it ends with truth." I nodded slowly. The guilt didn't vanish, but it quieted, and that was enough. I went overboard that weekend. Drafted a press release using phrases like urban renewal catalyst and residential equity recalibration. I even replied to a neighbor's email pretending to be LMI's communications director with a paragraph so jargon-heavy it made me dizzy. "We appreciate your inquiry. At this time, public discourse will be welcomed via stakeholder forums once the Phase 1 infrastructure audit concludes." Bill read it and nearly spit out his coffee. "What the hell does that even mean?" I grinned. "Absolutely nothing, but it sounds terrifying, right?" We both laughed. It was the first time I'd seen him genuinely amused since this started. Meanwhile, Sharon's cracks began to show. She called Ron twice in one day. I overheard his end of the second call through his kitchen window. "No, I didn't approve any signage," he said, voice tense. "I don't remember any discussion about development." Pause. "Well, maybe you should have looped in the board before making unilateral decisions." When he hung up, he sat down slowly rubbing his temples. The tide was shifting. Sharon was no longer whispering orders, she was scrambling for explanations. By Monday, the neighborhood was spiraling. One man marched down the street yelling into his phone, "I need to know if my mortgage is at risk. What if the land value drops?" Another couple quietly loaded their SUV murmuring, "Let's list now before it's too late." The gas station clerk told Bill someone came in asking where to submit their relocation paperwork. And in the middle of it all was Sharon sitting in her office with stacks of HOA bylaws, hands shaking sticky notes spread like a war map. She opened her blinds, closed them, opened them again. Her eyes were bloodshot. That night I sat across the lake, binoculars pressed to my face. Sharon paced her living room barefoot, her perfect posture slouched. I whispered to no one but the wind, "Now you know what it feels like." Then I lowered the binoculars, leaned back into the shadows, and let the weight of my plans settle. It wasn't over, but for the first time, I wasn't the one being hunted. As I watched Sharon from behind my blinds storming down the street, in her Powerwalk cell phone glued to her ear, I felt a strange calm. Not joy, not revenge, just balance, like the scale was finally tilting the other way. She didn't know what was coming, and for once I wasn't the one in the dark. Was it petty? Maybe. But it felt necessary, because fear once planted grows roots fast, and I was done letting mine keep me still. If she wanted to play chess, fine. I just flipped the board. That night, I sat by my kitchen table with the lights off, just the glow of my laptop screen lighting up the room. I'd made a folder labeled HOA War, and inside it I dumped everything. Screenshots of fines, emails from neighbors, even photos of Rodriguez's empty front porch. I didn't know why I was saving it all. Maybe to build a case. Maybe just to remind myself this was real. But as I sat there, something hit me. People need to know. This stuff happens. Not just to me, to anyone who's ever been bullied by someone with a little bit of power and a lot of free time. I didn't know then that I'd end up sharing this story. But if you're hearing it now, somehow, somewhere, it means maybe you've been through something like this too. Maybe you've had your own Sharon. And if so, I hope this helps you realize you're not alone. Not anymore. The folding chairs creaked like old bones every time someone shifted. Rows of them filled the small community center, arranged in uneven lines under buzzing fluorescent lights. The walls were painted beige with peeling corners, and a dusty projector sat crooked on a metal cart. The air smelled faintly of coffee and musty carpet. Residents trickled in one by one, murmuring in low tones. Someone dropped a pen. Someone else whispered, "Did you hear?" Near the back, a teenager filmed discreetly with their phone. An elderly man in a flannel jacket already looked like he might doze off. I stood near the doorway, unsure if I was ready. I told myself I had a plan. I told myself the signs, the website, the whispers, everything had built to this. But the moment I stepped into that room, doubt washed over me like cold rain. What if they don't believe me? What if I'm wrong? Sharon had run this place like a courtroom for so long, most people didn't even question her authority. And if I stood up and failed, I wouldn't just lose face. I might lose the last thread of courage I'd managed to stitch together. I gripped the chair in front of me, knuckles white. Please, let the truth matter. Sharon entered just past 6. She wore a navy blue pantsuit, heels clicking confidently against the tile floor, clipboard tucked under one arm. She smiled that politician's smile, thin and controlled. A few people nodded politely. Others avoided eye contact. She sat at the long table in front, surrounded by stacks of folders and a pitcher of water. The projector screen behind her glowed blank, flickering slightly. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice clear and composed. "I want to address the recent rumors circulating about a supposed redevelopment project. I can assure you those claims are false and designed to sow panic." She clicked a button on her remote, and a slide appeared behind her. Neighborhood value trends, a bar graph meaningless to most. As you can see, property values have steadily increased under my leadership. There is no credible threat to your homes. These signs and websites, fabrications, likely the work of external agitators or someone who misunderstands the administrative process. She sipped her water. "We are investigating these actions fully, and anyone found responsible will face consequences. This board is committed to order." Her confidence wasn't just intact, it was inflated. She actually believed she still had control. Ron sat a few chairs down from me. I noticed the way he kept glancing at Sharon, then at the crumpled paper in his hand. His foot tapped the floor nervously. I remembered him telling me how he signed those forms, trusting her. I could see the guilt swimming behind his eyes. When Sharon paused, Ron stood. There was a beat of silence. "Sharon," he said, voice soft but firm. "Last week, you asked me to sign documents you claimed were about mailbox repairs. I didn't read them. I trusted you." The room went still. Someone gasped. "Now, I think you used my name for something else." Sharon's face froze. Her lips tightened. "Ron," she said slowly, Those were standard maintenance authorizations. You've been on the board long enough to know how the paperwork works. Ron shook his head. But I didn't know what I was signing, and now half the neighborhood thinks they're being evicted. Sharon started to speak, but the crowd shifted. A woman stood up near the middle. Then who approved all these fines? Another voice added. Why did my neighbor move out last month without a word? The atmosphere cracked. Murmurs swelled. Eyes narrowed. For the first time, people weren't just asking questions, they were demanding answers. Rodriguez stepped forward slowly, holding something in his hand. This is a drawing my daughter made, he said. She drew it on our porch the night before we had to leave. That porch is gone now. He held up the paper-faded crayon strokes, a stick figure, family, a tiny blue house with heart-shaped windows. Sharon fined us until we couldn't breathe. We lost our home. My daughter lost her home. You tell me how that helps property values. His voice cracked on the last word. The entire room was quiet. Then Mrs. Johnson stood pulling a small wedding photo from her purse. This is me and my husband in front of our garden, she said. That garden is gone. The house is gone. All because I planted daisies instead of marigolds. I'm 75 years old. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I lost everything. Her hands shook as she held the photo out like proof in a courtroom. No one moved. Even the teen with the phone had stopped recording, eyes wide, mouth open. Sharon's posture stiffened. She reached for her papers, trying to regain ground. But as she stood, the stack slipped from her arms and scattered across the floor with a loud, chaotic flutter. No one helped her pick them up. I rose slowly, heart hammering. The silence felt thick, expectant. I looked around at the crowd, saw Rodriguez holding his daughter's drawing, like armor misses. Johnson clutching her past. My throat dried. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Fear returned. What if I messed this up? What if they turned on me instead? But then I saw Mrs. Park near the back, holding her son's hand. Tears in her eyes. That was enough. I have something to say, I said, voice shaking. I created that fake development plan. Not to hurt anyone, but to show what it feels like to live in fear of losing your home. There were murmurs again. I stepped forward, because 3 weeks ago, Sharon sold my cabin without asking, said I violated too many rules, and I'm not the only one. She's fined people into submission, silenced complaints, and she used Ron's signature to backdoor approvals. I looked right at her. You built your power on silence, Sharon. She stared at me, trembling now. We just stopped being quiet. The room held its breath. And in that moment I knew this wasn't over, but the tide had turned, and Sharon knew it too. After the meeting, nobody said much. People filed out quietly, some in tears, some just shaking their heads. Sharon didn't look back. When she left, she just kept walking fast and stiff, like she might break if she slowed down. I stood there with Rodriguez and Mrs. Johnson, feeling this heavy silence settle over all of us. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't over. It was like the moment after a storm when the clouds break, but you're still standing in puddles. I knew we'd exposed her finally, but the reckoning, that was still ahead. What do you do after justice? After you finally win, I sat in my cabin with the lights off. The only sound was the low hum of the fridge. The journal was open in front of me, pen in hand, but I couldn't write. Instead, I clicked on the recorder app on my phone and whispered into the mic. What do you do after justice, after you finally win? My voice sounded foreign, detached. Why does it feel like nothing's changed? I let the silence answer. Sharon's house stood like a tomb. Grass grew wild at the edges, creeping over the walkway, like it wanted to swallow the structure whole. The windows were always closed now, blinds drawn tight. No more tulips by the front porch, no flags, just silence. Someone had stuffed a typed note into her mailbox last week. Justice tastes bitter, doesn't it? No name, just ink and vengeance. Word got around that she'd been turned away at Brookside Market. Cashiers looked away. Baggers found excuses to leave their lanes. One neighbor swore she saw Sharon standing frozen in the dairy aisle, holding a gallon of milk, tears in her eyes. Another claimed someone dumped birdseed on her windshield with a note, "Feed the pigeons, not your ego." The mob didn't wear hoods anymore. They just clicked send or looked away. I saw her again 3 days later, at Mitchell's Market. I was grabbing coffee and frozen peas when I spotted her standing in the checkout line alone. The woman in front of her turned, noticed Sharon, then pulled her cart to another register. The cashier's smile faltered. Sharon's hands trembled. Then she saw me. Her lips moved before her voice did. I gave order to chaos. Now there's nothing but mud, she whispered. I stood there unsure. You gave control, I said flatly, to fear. She nodded once, no anger, just a kind of tired that doesn't sleep off. When the police finally came to my door, it wasn't sirens or shouting, just two calm knocks. My palms were slick with sweat. For a moment, I wondered if I'd gone too far, if the fake development project had spiraled out. I opened the door and met two officers, one tall, bald clipboard in hand, the other young with nervous eyes. Mr. Reed, the tall one, said, "We're following up on some irregular filings, HOA land transactions, citations, property disclosures. May we speak inside?" I led them in, heart pounding. "I have everything documented," I said. My voice cracked. "Right here." I opened the binder with shaking hands. The younger one began with a baited question. "Did you collect any money from these development plans?" I blinked. "No, never." "Did you offer property to outside buyers?" "No." "I staged a fake company to expose abuse. That's all." They looked at each other. Then the older one smirked. "You wouldn't believe what people do to get out of HOA fines." "I would," I said. "I lived it." After an hour of questions and explanations, they thanked me for the cooperation. As they left, the younger officer paused. "My aunt got fined $200 for putting a wind chime too close to her neighbor's fence. HO as man. They start with a smile and end with a summons." Later that evening, a man knocked on my door. New face, rough hands, tired eyes. Said his name was Marcus, a single dad trying to buy a house nearby. "I was going to close on one down the street," he said. "But after all the panic with your fake development, the bank backed off. Said too much uncertainty." My stomach dropped. "I didn't mean," he held up a hand, "just, next time you want to teach someone a lesson, don't burn everyone else's calendar." I apologized. Genuinely. He nodded, but didn't smile. The ripples of what I'd done didn't stop there. Bill and Rodriguez started a community group. They hosted the first meeting in the park under string lights. About 20 people came. Rodriguez brought iced tea. Bill printed flyers. They called it the New Neighbors Coalition. First item on the agenda, amend the HOA charter to prevent unchecked power. An email arrived in my inbox 2 days later from a woman named Karen Tron, an attorney with an organization called Fair Communities United. "We monitor and support residents facing HOA abuse," she wrote. "We've heard about your stand. We're offering legal guidance if needed." The army I never asked for was growing. One night, Ron showed up on my porch holding a sealed envelope. "She wrote this 6 months ago," he said. "Before everything. Gave it to the board. No one read it." Inside was a typed letter, Sharon's words. "A proposal to reduce fines, offer appeals, open public comment before citations." It was dated 3 months before she tried to list my cabin. "She used to cry at night," Ron murmured. "Said rules were the only thing people respected her for." I read the letter again, and again. Was this always her plan, or her last defense? That night, I sat by the lake holding the paper, like it was burning my hands. The moon rippled on the water. I thought of all the voices, Mrs. Johnson, Marcus, Sharon, even my own, and I asked a question into the darkness. Would you forgive the hand that almost took your home, if that hand was only trying to feel in control of its own life? It started with one screw. Bill walked up to the HO, office with a cordless drill, and took out the top left bolt of the Lakeside Neighborhood Authority sign. No words, just the soft whirring of justice. Then Mrs. Park walked up and started filming. Then Rodriguez. Then the new guy at Lot. By sunset, the whole sign was down. No one stopped us. Sharon just peeked through her blinds like she was watching her own funeral. That video, it hit 600 shares on the community board in 3 hours. Caption read, "Power built on fear falls faster than it rises." The sun crept in gently, one beam at a time, across the floorboards of my cabin. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee mug in hand, fingers tracing the old scrape on the armrest where my ex-wife once knocked over a lamp mid-argument. It was smooth now, worn soft by time and elbow. Outside, the lake shimmered like it had never seen a lie. I took a breath and whispered to no one, "Still here." The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had tilted. A local paper ran a full-page article, "Fake Development Project Unmasks HOA Corruption Ring." They had used a photo of my cabin, the sun flaring over the shingles. Just beneath it, a blurry image of Sharon head down in handcuffs. My name was bolded in the second paragraph. They called me a whistleblower. I wasn't sure that was the word, more like a man who finally got tired of swallowing it. A week later, I got an email from a podcast producer, Civil Voices. They were doing a special on small-town power abuse and wanted my voice. I recorded the interview in one take sitting right there in the cabin with the crickets buzzing outside. When the host asked, "What made you fight back?" I said, "Because when someone puts a for sale sign on your porch, you either pack up or tear it down." The town organized something called Reclaim the Lake Day. Bill told me about it while handing me a flyer at the general store. I showed up expecting a quiet picnic. Instead, I found banners strung across the community board that read, "Homes are for healing, not choarting power." Kids ran around with sidewalk chalk, sketching cabins, stick-figure neighbors holding hands. Someone passed me a brush and said, "You want to help repaint the bulletin?" So, I did. Sharon hadn't vanished. Word spread that before her court date, she had sent handwritten letters to every resident. Ron handed me mine without a word. It was sealed in a plain white envelope. I stood there a long time before opening it. Her handwriting was small but sharp. I tried to build walls to keep pain out. I ended up trapping myself inside. "I'm sorry." I stared at the paper. For a second I wanted to toss it into the fire pit, but instead I folded it slowly and slid it into the back of my drawer. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I didn't want to forget either. Sharon wasn't a monster, just a woman who thought control would keep her from breaking. We all have our armor. Later that night, I sat by the window and thought about the other times I'd stayed silent. I remembered standing in HR being told my position was no longer essential. I had nodded. I remembered letting friends dump their problems on me for years without ever asking how I was doing. I remembered the judge's eyes during my divorce hearing how I couldn't even say she left first. But when I saw my porch with that red-lettered sign for sale in block font, something inside me finally stood up. Not this time. Not my home. Not my peace. I'd see healing take shape in the people around me too. Mrs. Johnson sent me a picture of her new apartment. In the photo behind her smile was a windowsill with a clay pot. Yellow daisies bloomed. She'd mislabeled them again, called them chrysanthemums. I didn't correct her. That flower didn't need a perfect name to thrive. Rodriguez invited me over one morning. His daughter had drawn blueprints for a treehouse, and he was building it piece by piece in the backyard. He showed me the beams with proud hands, as if each nail was a declaration. She wanted a slide, he chuckled. So, we're going to give her a slide. I found Mrs. Park tending to her tomatoes again. She looked up and smiled, passing me a jar of kimchi like always. "You saved us all," she said softly. I shook my head. No, I just reminded people they weren't alone. It wasn't a parade, there was no brass band, no confetti, but the neighborhood had changed. Rules were being rewritten, fences were coming down. Someone hung wind chimes from a porch that had always been silent. A teenage boy painted a mural on the back of his shed, a lake, a cabin, and the word "stay." The podcast episode aired a few weeks later. I listened to it once. My voice sounded different, firmer, but kind. They had edited in the sound of lapping water behind my story. I turned it off halfway through. I didn't need to hear the end. One morning the lake was glass. I pushed my little boat off the dock and rowed out slowly. The only thing I brought was an old wooden yardstick, Sharon's favorite enforcement tool. I held it up to the light, saw the faded black ink marking 6 inches, 12 inches. How many fines had this thing triggered? At the center of the lake, I paused. The air was clean. No engines, no rules, just breath. I whispered, "Some rules are meant to be buried." Then I let go. The yardstick hit the water with a soft slap, floated for a moment, then sank. I watched until the last ripple faded, then turned the boat around, back toward shore, back toward home. And in that moment, with the sun above and the water calm, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Now when I sit on the porch, the lake feels like mine again. Not because I fought harder than her, but because I finally fought it all. People wave when they walk by now. Kids ride their bikes past without looking over their shoulders. And Sharon's house. It's still there, but it's quiet. No clipboards, no tape measures, just silence. I don't know what'll happen next year or the year after. Maybe another Sharon shows up. Maybe not. But now I know I won't be the guy who stays quiet. Not ever again. You know what the weirdest part is? After it was all over, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt responsible. Like, maybe I should have stood up sooner, but hey, better late than silent forever. They say quiet people don't make noise. I say when we finally speak, we don't whisper, we wreck walls. And the thing is, it never really ends, does it? The rules change, the names change, but there's always someone ready to turn fear into a policy and control into a job title. That's why I keep the binder, yeah, the one with the fines, the photos, the letters, not to stay angry, just to remember, because forgetting is how it starts again. Sometimes I hear a car slow down near Sharon's place, see someone pointing at her porch, and I wonder, do they know what happened here, or are they just measuring setbacks and fence heights already? Either way, I'll be ready. This time, I won't wait. When we finally speak, we don't whisper, we wreck walls. And maybe that's what this whole thing was about. Not revenge, not justice, just finally making noise loud enough to be heard. It didn't fix everything, but it cracked the silence. And sometimes that's enough. Maybe the real lesson here is if the system's rigged against, you don't wait for permission to flip the table. If you're still here, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Tell me your version of Sharon or just say hi. And hey, if you like this one and want to support the channel, you can always hit the little thanks button below. Doesn't have to be much, just helps keep the stories coming. Thanks for hanging out. Catch you in the next one.
QA Stories thanks you for hanging out today. Don't forget to binge a few more. Trust us, you'll be hooked.